Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the revolutions that were started as a result of the Enlightenment movement in the Americas and in France. So first of all, looking at your I can statements, I want you to be able to tell me the impact of the Enlightenment on the political revolutions. I want us to be able to identify the impact of the Enlightenment on the Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens. And I want us to be able to compare the causes, characteristics, and consequences of the American Revolution and the French Revolution. So going through this video, that's what we should be able to do by the end of the notes. Okay, so the first revolution we're going to talk about is one you're very familiar with. And so I'm not going to go through every single event in the American Revolution because you guys probably have a lot of knowledge of that. But I just want to touch on a few things. As you guys well know, the colonies in the New World were under British rule, and they were expected to follow British law even though they had established their own governments in the colonies. And remember, they did not have representation in Parliament. They didn't have anyone over, and they didn't have a say in the British government. So when the British were passing all of these acts and all of these things in for the colonies, it was very angering to them because they felt like they had no say. And as you guys know, you probably remember from 8th grade, all of the different acts that were passed in the colonies that were there to upset them, like the Declaration or Proclamation of 1763, saying they couldn't settle past the Appalachians, and the Tea Act and the Quartering Act, where they had to quarter troops. And one I pointed out was the Navigation Acts, which really made and solidified that policy of mercantilism, saying that the colonists couldn't trade with any other country except for Great Britain. And really what angered the colonists was the Stamp Act, which was the act that taxed the colonists because of the French and Indian War. England was in debt. They didn't have a lot of money, so they figured, oh, we'll just tax our colonies, and that's where we'll get money from. But it enraged the colonists, and they started to cry that that was taxation without representation because they were paying for things, yet they didn't have a say in the English government. So in response, the colonists boycott the British goods, and they refuse to buy British goods. And the Stamp Act is eventually repealed, but so now this is going to spark some revolutionary thought in a lot of these colonists, and they're going to start to believe that they don't have to tolerate oppression and they don't have to listen to an oppressive monarch because they see the example of the Glorious Revolution in 1688 in England. They see that England is moving toward that constitutional monarchy with a Bill of Rights, and so they're going to start to invoke that revolutionary thought. And there's writers such as Thomas Paine, who writes the pamphlet Common Sense. He's going to use those Enlightenment ideas and logic and reason to solve the problem that the British are imposing. And so people are going to start to see that, and they're going to read, and that's when the Revolutionary War begins. In 1775, violence erupts at the Battle of Lexington and Concord, and the war begins for independence. And you guys all know about that from review. So we're really going to focus on how did the Enlightenment influence this war, and how did it influence this revolutionary ideas? And really, when you look at it, a lot of these things that are in our Declaration of Independence and in the U.S. Constitution are ideas that take its roots in the Enlightenment. A lot of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, they used the ideas from the Enlightenment to argue for independence. They used the ideas of Locke and Rousseau and Montesquieu. And if you look at our Declaration of Independence, it's mainly based on the ideas of John Locke that we have natural rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And they argued that the purpose of our government is to protect the individual rights of people. And this includes those unalienable rights, like I said. And so because of all of this Enlightenment influence, you're going to start to see foreign volunteers. The Marquis de Lafayette, he's going to come over from France and help us fight, help the Americans fight for revolution, because the Enlightenment is going on in Europe and people are starting to take hold of this new thought, and they're going to start to apply it and want to reform their governments. Okay, so looking at the Declaration of Independence, go ahead and pause the video and read this and tell me, how did Enlightenment ideas impact this document? We just talked about it. but that's what I want you to do. So the United States is formed after we win the American Revolution and we get our freedom from the British. The founding fathers needed to start to write a constitution. And the first constitutions written is the Articles of Confederation. And that actually gives the states way too much power. It almost doesn't even set up a federal government. So the Constitutional Convention meets in 1787, and they bring that knowledge of Locke and Montesquieu and Rousseau, and they want to apply these Enlightenment ideas to drafting a constitution. And that's exactly what they do. And the United States Constitution is adopted. It's written in 1787. And it's eventually adopted in 1789. And we know that our United States Constitution includes the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. The most important thing that the Constitution includes are the principles of the Constitution. And you guys have probably heard of these principles, but I want to go through them with you really quickly. First of all, checks and balances. No branch of government is going to have more power than the other. You have separation of powers, 3 branches, judicial, executive, and legislative. Each branch has a job. You have the idea of federalism, and this is just the fact that the power is divided between the states and the national government, meaning that they share power. The states have some power and the national government has power. And that's really important that that was included because that was the problem with the Articles of Confederation. The fourth principle, individual rights. We have a Bill of Rights. We have the first 10 amendments that guarantees the rights of the people. You have limited government. All the people, including the rulers, are subject to the law. So that is a really important principle of our Constitution because it makes sure that we don't have any kind of dictator that comes in and imposes an unlimited government. The sixth principle is popular sovereignty. It just means the people have supreme power. And what I did, I capitalized the P's and I showed you down here. This helps me remember popular sovereignty if you can remember that people have the power, and that is popular sovereignty. And the seventh principle that we have in our Constitution is the idea of a republic. And that's just when a government in which representatives are elected. And I know you can't see this, but remember how you guys can remember representative. And that's republic comes from Rome. Rome had representatives, and you can remember those R's. So those are the principles of the Constitution that are included that make our country a free, limited government. And you can think about all those ideas stem from these Enlightenment thinkers and this Enlightenment thought and how it influenced our Constitution. All right, so now we're going to get into the French Revolution. And the French Revolution was quite a bit different than the American Revolution. First of all, in some of the things that caused the French Revolution. As we know, in the American Revolution, that was caused a lot by colonial mercantilism and control of a mother country. Well, the French Revolution was kind of a combat of the French people on their own government. And it had a lot to do with, first of all, the social system, the social divisions of the old regime is what that was called in France. And it was kind of this system of feudalism that they wanted to break down. They had 3 social classes. The first estate was the clergy, members of the church. The second estate is the noblemen who were born into nobility. And the third estate were the commoners. And this common class included a class called the bourgeoisie. And the bourgeoisie, they were kind of the upper middle class, but they were still considered members of the first estate. So this social system was something that these French people wanted to They wanted to break that down. They didn't like how they were divided into those 3 social classes and that this system was continuing to weigh on the French common people. Also, these Enlightenment ideas that had a huge impact on the French Revolution. People were not willing to accept that divine right of King Louis XVI anymore, which was the French king, and he's pictured up here. He was the king as the revolution is starting. And so people are starting to say, we don't accept that he has been given the right to rule, that maybe the ruler should be someone who is fit for the job or talent-based. And the bourgeoisie were starting to feel that the privileges of the nobles are unfair. So again, this system of feudalism, this social system is unfair. And France was facing an economic crisis. There had costly wars, expenses in the kingdom, and the king could no longer borrow for these things. So the third estate is the only class that is paying taxes. And as this picture is showing, the third estate is having to carry the members of the first and second estate because they are the ones paying all the taxes. So the nobles call for an estates general or a national assembly or legislature to deal with all of these problems, because they wanted to raise these new taxes to pay for all the wars. So they were going to have to call this national assembly in order to. The characteristics of the French Revolution were a little bit different than the characteristics of the American Revolution. The European foreign powers, a lot of them supported the Americas in their attempts to overthrow the English government. However, there was a great fear that if the French Revolution was successful and the French monarch was overthrown, then many other kingdoms would be overthrown. And so the French really didn't have the support of the other foreign powers in Europe. For the most part, it was an anti-religious revolution. The people were losing trust in the church because the clergy was part of that first estate. And so when the revolution takes place, lots of church lands are seized and churches are shut down, and the National Assembly ends up taking those lands. So it has kind of anti-religious undertones, and the radical portion of this revolution is very anti-religious. And the French Revolution really sparks a sense of nationalism. People are going to have new pride in the French nation, and they're going to take this nationalism and really expand that as they continue to revolt and demand equal rights. Kind of building up a militia and trying to build an army of revolution. And this is known as the storming of the Bastille, which the Bastille was the royal prison. And the king responds, was very fearful, so he recognizes the National Assembly as the representation of the common people. And so this July 14th, 1789 is viewed as French Independence Day. It's almost like our equivalent to July the 4th, because this is the day that the National Assembly was recognized by the king. The National Assembly, first what they do, they abolish the rights of the nobles and they seize land from the clergy to pay off debt. So you can see they're taking land from the church in order to pay off some of the debt of the government. Something else that they do that's extremely important is write the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens. And this is kind of like the version of the Declaration of Independence. And it says that the government is going to rest in the hands of the people, or by the consent of the governed. It's going to live by the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And so the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens is going to be that document that declares the French people that they now have rights and they now have liberty. And so you're going to see these Enlightenment principles drive these people for a social reform. So they draft a constitution and they try to create a constitutional monarchy in France. All right, well, in July of 1790, Louis XVI very reluctantly accepts the terms of the Constitution. However, in the wake of the revolution and the climate at Versailles, the king and his family decide that they are going to escape and flee Versailles in June of 1791. However, he and his family are caught. And this does not do well for the French people because they see their king trying to flee amidst the revolution. So shortly thereafter, the French monarchy is overthrown and France is converted to a republic form of government. and a convention is elected. So this legislature is elected, and Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, his wife, are tried for treason and are beheaded by the guillotine. So both the King and the Queen of France are overthrown and beheaded. And at this time, a group of radicals take over the revolution, and these radicals are known as the Jacobins. New French Republic is now going to be seen as a threat to a lot of the other European nations because they're afraid of their kingdoms being overtaken by revolution. So France is now at war with other European powers who fear that their countries are going to take on this new revolutionary idea. So a committee of public safety takes over, and the leader of this reign of terror in France, his name is Maximilien Robespierre, and he is the one who kind of instigates and institutes this reign of terror because he believes that that's how you get control and how you have government is through this terror. And he was a follower of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, so he did have the influence of Enlightenment ideas. But Robespierre used force and terror and fear to crush any of the people who opposed him. And so he passed laws against anyone who might disagree with him, that they could be arrested. And now people no longer have the ability to defend themselves. So people lived in fear of the government at this time, and many people are killed using the guillotine, which you can see the pictures here of the very famous guillotine that took the lives of so many people during the Reign of Terror. During the Reign of Terror, like I said, France was at war with other countries. And so France, they introduced this conscription requiring all men to serve in the army. And so once France has built up this large army, they're no longer threatened by the other countries. And so they no longer are relying on Robespierre, and they gain the courage to seize him and his followers and eventually execute him. So Robespierre's rule is ended, and moderates come in and they take control of the government, and they form a third constitution. So you can see the ups and downs that the French Revolution has taken, and the ideas and how it went from trying to establish constitutional monarchy to the radical Republican government, and now moderates take control and try to institute a new constitution. Well, this instability and this corruption, that's going to kind of set the stage for Napoleon Bonaparte to come in and take over the government. So the revolution in France, it was kind of the first revolution to really challenge that divine right. Do the kings really have the right to rule, or should we pick the best man for the job? They also take a stand on democratic government. They want a democracy, they want a say, and they want social equality. So the power is going to shift from the king to that bourgeoisie class of common people. And it's also going to serve as a model for future revolts and change in oppressed countries. So you're going to see how the French Revolution is going to impact and influence other countries to revolt. So how did the Enlightenment influence revolutionary thought? And how was the French-American Revolution different from the French Revolution? And how were they the same? I want you guys to answer these on your paper. We will be talking about them in class next time we meet.